this talk, so during this talk, we will talk about the design for intelligence in relation with widget. That is one of the most features introduced by Apple. So what do we mean when we talk about intelligence? Intelligence is when the system and the app works together to make users' life easier. People rely on application to do a very variety of functions. So the goals of intelligence is to make these actions as smooth as possible. The focus here is on the user and on his behaviors. The intelligence is something that is adaptive, so it means that it changes to help the platform and the system conform to the user. It's not a static concept like an icon or just a layout. So in the last year, Apple has introduced the concept of extensibility. Extensibility allows to make quick interactions and saves people's time. So you can add extensions to the functionalities of your application, and this will empower the usability and also the visibility of the app. This will create a more dynamic ecosystem and also give the possibility to access an app through many entry points of the home screen. If you think about it, you can access an app through Siri suggestions, shortcuts, and widgets. All these extensions will conform to the paradigm of the design for intelligence. If you think about, for example, Siri suggestions, they make reach our goal faster, but they are different if you look at different devices for different users, because they change and they adapt to the user. So during this session, we will focus on the last feature that has introduced Apple, that is widgets. That widget really conform to the ideas of the design for intelligence, mainly for three important aspects. They are glanceable, so that means that they are focused on just one simple idea, and they display this amount of information little for time. That means that you can see the content and information you are looking for at a glance. You don't need to look for that information. They are relevant. That means that they are always updated and they are always showing the most important information. Then with the Smart Stack, the information that you are looking for is always on top of the stack. The last point is that they can be personalized. That means that you can personalize the data that you are displaying, for example, setting up some parameters, and also you can customize the layout of the widget, setting up different sizes. Widget supports three different types of sizes: small, medium, and large. Your widget can support just one of these sizes, two of these, or all of three of these. It's not mandatory to support all three sizes. You have to keep in mind that the widgets are focused on just one simple idea. So you have to think about the amount of information that you want to display to the user. It's not a good practice just to take the small layout and stretch it to medium or bigger, because you have to think about what you want to show to the user. So you don't have to support all three sizes if you don't know how to show this type of information. The widgets are supported by three platforms, from iPad, iPhone, and Mac. The iPad will display a widget in the Today view and in the stack. The iPhone will display the widget in the home screen in the Today view and the Smart Stack, and the Mac just in Notification Center. WidgetKit is the framework that allows us to build our widget for all three platforms. So all you need to do is to add the widget extension in your host application, and this will create a basic template with the implementation of the widget protocol, and also a basic implementation of the UI that is implemented in SwiftUI, of course. So once you have created your widget, you need to set up and configure the widget to make it conform with the ideas of the design for intelligence. Here, we will see mainly three important aspects for a widget setup that are configuration, update, and communication with the system. We can start with the configuration. Widgets support two types of configuration, a static configuration and the intent configuration. The static configuration render data as they are, so they have no configurable parameters. The user can change the information he's seeing. For example, the podcast widget just displays the last podcast that you've listened to, so you don't have the chance to change it. Otherwise, the intent configuration has configurable parameters, so the user can set the parameters to change the data filter with these parameters. For example, the clock widget. If you long press on the clock widget, you will see an alert with edit widget. You can edit your widget, so it will open a UI for the configuration of the widget with all the parameters that you can set. In the case of the clock widget, you can set the location parameter, so you will display the time for that particular city. The same ideas is for the forecast widget, for example. So you can add multiple widgets with different parameters, and you can display, I don't know, forecast widget for Turin, London in the same screen. So how can you add these parameters to your widget? You need to create an intent. The concept of intent was already introduced with CircuitKit. The intent represents a task that an app supports. To create your intent, you need to add the intent configuration file in your extension. So here you can define all your custom intent. The category of this intent will be view, because of course you are rendering some information. And then you can add an array of parameters. Every parameter that you add in this array will be a row that will be added in the configuration UI of the widget. There are many different types of these parameters, so you don't even have to worry about the UI of these parameters because there is a default implementation that Apple provides. So you can add a string, and this will create a text field where you can write in. Or you can have Boolean parameters that will create a switch, and so on. You can choose integer pickers for location or person. So once you have configured the widget, you need to think about how to update the widget's view. Once you have created your widget, you need to implement the timeline of the widget. This timeline will tell the widget when to reload a new view. So does WidgetKit how to update the widget's view? In fact, the widget is composed by an array of entries. This entry has a date properties that tells WidgetKit when to load this specific entry. Then you have rendering info and an optional relevance that tells how much is important that entry compared to the other in the past. Once that WidgetKit has reload all these views, you need to tell WidgetKit when to request a new timeline. For that reason, you need to set a reload policy. The reload policy can assume 3 different values. At the end, that means that WidgetKit will request a new timeline when the first one is completed, after a specific date, or never. In the case of never, it means that it will be the host application that will request a new timeline from the widget center. So it's really complicated to find a good setup between the space of the entries and the reload policy, because you have to respect some rules. In fact, the widget has a budget of 24 hours. In these hours, the WidgetKit has to distribute the reload. So this is mainly to save the user's battery. During the first period that you have installed the widget, the system will take few days to learn how the users behave with the widget. So during this period, you may receive more reloads than necessary. After that learning period, the system has to distribute the reload based on some factors. The first one is the frequency and the times the user sees the widget. In fact, if the widget is in the last screen of the home, the system can decide to reduce the reload and reload the view just when the user sees it. The second factor, it depends on the widget last reload time, because the times of reload can be too close. And the third factor is whether the app containing widgets is active or not. So by default, for a widget that is frequently viewed, you have from 40 to 70 refresh per day. That means from 15 to 60 minutes every reload. Which are the best practices that you need to follow to update your widget correctly? The first one is that if you have many predictable dates, it's better to have a timeline with as many dates as possible. So it's better a longer timeline than a lot of shorter timeline. Then, if nothing significant changes happens in your app, you don't need to reload the views. For example, if you have a widget for the stock markets, you don't need to reload this view when the markets are closed because nothing has changed in your app. So it's just consuming your device's battery. The last point is that you need to space the entries in your timeline because there is a minimum reload time of 5 minutes. So it's useless to put this entry closer. Once you have configured the widget and update his view, you need to communicate with the system. With the introduction of the widget, Apple has introduced also the Smart Stack component. The Smart Stack components combine several widgets. You can manually scroll through this widget, or you can enable the auto rotation. And the Smart Stack will rotate through this widget during all the day. Of course, you can edit the Smart Stack, and you can edit the widget, add several widgets, or remove others widgets. This component is really interesting because we have access to a variety of functions in the same place, just in the home screen. So it would be really good to find information that you are looking for at the right time. The Smart Stack needs to be glanceable and timely. But how can the Smart Stacks behave like that? So when the Smart Stack will surface my widgets. There are two important reasons for the Smart Stack to surface a widget. The first one is for a user behavior. And the second one is when something important happens in your applications. Let's start with the user behavior. If when I wake up, I'm always checking the forecast app for the forecast of Turin, the system can learn that that is my behavior and can predict my action. So when I will unlock the phone in the morning, the Smart Stack can surface the widget of the forecast for my city. That will save my time because I don't need to search for the forecast application and check the weather, but I can find it at a glance in my home screen. So it's saving my time. So how can the user learn my behavior? We have to communicate to the system the action that the user is doing. So we can do this through the intent donation. The intent donation was already used for Siri suggestions. If you think about it in the spotlight, you see the most frequent action that the user is performing. Here is the same idea with the difference that the intent donation will help our Smart Stack to surface my widget. And also they provide a timely information. So the information that the user is searching for a particular time. Of course, we can donate the intent that we have defined in our intent donation file. So we have to mark this intent as eligible for Siri suggestion. There is a checkbox in this file and you have to check it. This will enable a bottom part in this file where you can set up the widget that is called suggestions. For example, you need to set the supported combination of your donations. That means that you have to define which parameters are important for that donation, which parameters are relevant to the system. And then when a user performs an action from your host app, you need to donate the intent with the parameter that you have set. Let's see an example. If I have a widget and an app that shows my last transactions for different credit cards. So I want to communicate to the system when the user is checking a particular credit card. That means that I need to set as a supported combination the card parameters because the system has to know which card I'm checking at a particular time. So, for example, if the user on Monday evening is checking a transaction for the Visa card, I have to send an intent to the system. The intent will have as a supported combination setted the Visa parameters. Then, the day after, the user is checking MasterCard. So I will send an intent to the system with the MasterCard parameters. And the same in the evening is checking Visa, and I will send an intent. So when the system find a common pattern in your donation, can do prediction. For example, in that case, the system can predict that on Wednesday evening, the user will check the Visa card. In that case, the system can do this prediction, and I have more chances that the smart stack will surface my widget because the system knows that these are my behaviors. So the second reason to surface my widget is for an app's information. So when something important happens in my application. As we saw before, when we create a widget, we need to implement the timeline. So every entry in the timeline has a relevance properties. This relevance tells how much is important this entry compared to the other in the past. The relevance can be nil, and in that case, it means that that entry has no relevance purposes. The relevance has mainly two properties that are score and duration. So the score can be 0, but also in this case, it means that this entry has no relevance purposes. The value of the value of the score is up to you because this value is compared to the other entries in your widget. So the range of the value is up to you. This score won't be compared to the other value of other application. So you don't have to worry about it. Then the duration is used when you have a relevance with a fixed duration in time. So if this value is greater than 0, the relevance will have a well-defined duration. If the value is 0, it means that the relevance will last until the next entries. So this is the example that we saw before for the transactions. And here you can see that we want to surface the widget when the transaction is higher, of course. So we can give the same value to of the transaction to the score. That means that when the transactions are lower, I have a few possibilities that the smart stack will surface my widget. But when the transaction values is higher, my widget could be surfaced by the smart stack. So I have more possibility to see this information on top of my stack. So to summarize, we can say that the system and the apps work together, mainly through the intent. The intent is the common languages between the system and the application. In fact, intent allows us to define what action we can perform in our application. We can define the action and also the parameters that are really important in that application. Allow us to learn how people do things, So we can learn his behaviors and his action through the intent donation. Once the system has learned how we behave, it can execute some actions to save our time, and he can perform also predictions. So I think that the widgets, it's a really powerful feature that Apple has introduced. And if you set up and configure the widget correctly, you can reach the goals of the design for intelligence, that is mainly saves people time and let him achieve more with less effort. Thank you.